People who prefer to be alone don't have a problem. The problem belongs to those who cannot be with themselves for even 10 minutes. And if someone has ever asked you why you went somewhere alone, as if that needed justification, or if you yourself have ever looked at someone sitting alone in a restaurant and felt something close to pity, what you're about to hear in this video is going to change exactly that way of thinking. There is a very precise psychological reason that explains why some people constantly need company and others don't. It has nothing to do with shyness. It has nothing to do with isolation. It has to do with something much more structural, how each person's mind is organized. And by the end of this video, you'll understand what science says about those who choose to be alone, and why that choice represents, in many cases, a real advantage over others. The spotlight effect. To understand this, we need to start with an uncomfortable question. Why does the idea of going somewhere alone bother people so much? In 2017, researchers at the University of Maryland published a finding few people expected. People actively avoid being alone in public, not because the experience itself is unpleasant, but because they anticipate the judgment of others. They believe that if they eat alone, others will think they have no friends, that if they go to the cinema alone, others will feel sorry for them. But the same study revealed something that completely changes the equation. That judgment practically doesn't exist. External observers rarely make a negative assessment of someone who is alone. Nobody is watching you. Nobody is thinking about you. Psychologists call this the spotlight effect, the tendency to believe you are the center of everyone's attention when in reality, each person is completely absorbed in their own thoughts, their own worries, their own life. The judgment we fear so much is, in most cases, a mental construction, a story we tell ourselves. Cultural conditioning. So, if that judgment doesn't really exist, why do we still feel it with such intensity? The answer lies in decades of cultural conditioning. From childhood, the message is consistent. The more social connections you have, the better person you are. Social media amplified that message to the extreme. Everyone posts photos in groups, dinners, trips, celebrations. Nobody posts that they ate alone on a Tuesday afternoon and it was extraordinarily good. So gradually, we learn to associate solitude with social failure, with something to hide or justify. But there is a group of people who never internalized that message, or who internalized it and chose to ignore it. And what sets them apart is not superficial personality. It goes much deeper. Autonomy. Deci and Ryan. Psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan have spent decades researching what conditions a human being needs to experience genuine psychological well-being. Their theory identifies three fundamental needs: autonomy, competence, and connection. People who feel comfortable being alone typically show a very high need for autonomy. They need direct control over their own decisions, what to eat, where to go, how long to stay, without negotiating it with anyone. This doesn't make them selfish people, it makes them people with a very defined relationship with their own freedom. And when that need for autonomy is met, the research is clear. Psychological well-being increases significantly. Loneliness versus solitude. There is a point that is fundamental to understand well, because it completely changes how everything before this is interpreted. There is a radical difference between feeling lonely and being alone. In English, there are two distinct terms for this: loneliness and solitude, and they are not equivalent at all. Loneliness, in its negative sense, is a condition that is imposed on you. It is wanting connection and not having it. It is the absence of something you need. It is, in essence, a form of pain. Solitude, on the other hand, is a choice. It is choosing to be alone because that is what you need in that moment, because it nourishes, because it recharges. The difference is not in the objective situation. It lies in whether you choose it or it is imposed on you. And that difference transforms everything. Benefits of solitude. Studies show that solitude activates very specific mental processes. It increases creative capacity, enhances self-reflection, and improves emotional regulation.
People accustomed to spending time alone develop a greater ability to identify what they feel and to process their own experiences with clarity. Carl Jung formulated this more than a century ago when he described introversion. It doesn't mean being shy or not enjoying company. It means the source of energy is internal, not external. Every social interaction consumes resources. Silence restores them.
Self-efficacy. Bandura. And here comes the point that very few address with honesty. Psychologist Albert Bandura dedicated decades to studying what he called self-efficacy, the belief a person holds in their own ability to face situations and solve problems. People who feel comfortable being alone consistently show very high levels of self-efficacy. They don't need anyone to confirm that they are capable. If they get lost, they find the solution. If something is unclear, they research it. If they get bored, they find an alternative. That confidence is not innate. It is the direct result of having repeatedly faced small situations alone until the brain builds a very concrete certainty. I can handle this. Undivided attention. And there is something else that happens when you are alone, and it has enormous value. Attention is not fragmented. There is no need to manage another person's emotional state. There is no need to maintain an image. There is no need to participate in conversations that generate no real interest. Research on mindfulness describes this as complete presence, being fully in what you are doing without internal division. It is exactly what happens when someone eats alone and truly savors what they are eating, or when they walk alone and perceive with clarity everything around them. And one of the mechanisms that consumes the most mental energy disappears: social comparison. Without anyone beside you to compare yourself to, you can be, effortlessly, exactly who you are. This is not about claiming it is better to be alone than in company. Each person has different needs, and all are legitimate. What this is about is understanding that choosing solitude is not a sign of a problem. It is, in many cases, a sign of psychological maturity, self-knowledge, and a solid relationship with oneself. If you are someone who still hasn't given yourself permission to go out alone, to eat alone, to travel alone, perhaps what is holding you back is not that you don't want to do it. It is that you have long believed you need a reason to do it. You don't need one. And if you already do it, and someone has ever asked you why you go alone, now you know with precision what is happening in their mind. The spotlight effect, social comparison, the fear of a judgment that, in most cases, never arrives. The next time someone asks you that question, you can respond with complete calm, because I can. And yet, there is something that science still hasn't fully explained, but that anyone who has learned to be with themselves recognizes immediately. When you stop needing someone else's presence to validate what you are living, something changes permanently in the way you relate to the world. Not because you become distant, but because you begin to choose. You choose who to be with. You choose when to share. You choose from fullness and not from fear of being alone. And that difference, though it may seem subtle, transforms absolutely everything. Most people spend a large part of their lives looking in others for what they can only find in themselves. They seek approval. They seek company to avoid facing silence. They seek conversation to avoid hearing their own thoughts. And there is no judgment in that. It is completely human. But it carries a very high cost. They never truly get to know themselves. People who have learned to be alone without feeling incomplete have done something that requires more courage than it seems. They have sat with their own thoughts without fleeing. They have made decisions without asking permission. They have enjoyed experiences without needing someone else to confirm them as valid. And over time, that practice builds something no external relationship can give you, a confidence that does not depend on circumstances. It is not about isolating yourself. It is about reaching a point where being alone no longer generates anxiety, but clarity, where silence stops being a threat and becomes a space where you can think, decide, and remember who you are when nobody is watching. That is the level few people reach, and if you are on that path, you already have an advantage. If this topic was valuable to you, subscribe to the channel. Every week we explore applied psychology with rigor and without detours. And tell me in the comments, is there somewhere you haven't yet dared to go alone?